You're dead to this family. Diana's words echoed in my design studio, her mascara-streaked face a stark contrast to the pristine wedding invitations scattered across my desk. The QR codes I'd embedded in each delicate border pattern gleamed under the fluorescent lights like tiny digital bombs that had already detonated. I kept my hands steady on my laptop keyboard, not looking up from the screen displaying the chaos unfolding across social media. I've been dead to this family for years, I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. The only difference is now everyone knows why. She slammed my laptop shut, nearly catching my fingers. The sound reverberated through the studio like a gunshot. How could you do this to me? On my wedding day? Your wedding day? I finally looked up, meeting her tear-filled eyes. The one where your fiancé was planning to spend the night with your maid of honor while you walked down the aisle? The color drained from her face. Through the studio's large windows, I could see people gathering on the street below, phones in hand, probably drawn by the local news vans that had started arriving an hour ago. The QR code scandal was trending nationally now. My sister's perfect life had unraveled in less than 24 hours, and I was the one holding the thread. Flashback 3 months earlier. The Thanksgiving dinner. I should have known it would end this way the moment I walked into my parents' house that November evening. The dining room was set with grandmother's best china, the delicate blue and white pattern that only came out for special occasions. Diana sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her recent promotion to marketing director at Morrison and Associates being celebrated with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for royal engagements. Sarah, sweetheart, come sit here, my mother Margaret called, patting the chair beside her. But not the one next to Diana. Never that one. That seat was reserved for Tyler, Diana's architect boyfriend who'd been conspicuously absent from the last 3 family gatherings. I'd spent 2 hours that morning baking Mom's favorite pumpkin cheesecake, using the recipe grandmother had passed down. It sat untouched on the kitchen counter while Diana's store-bought pie from the upscale bakery downtown took center stage. So, my father Robert said, carving the turkey with the precision he usually reserved for legal briefs. Diana was telling us about the Henderson account. Impressive work, honey. Diana beamed, her smile radiant under the dining room chandelier. It's the largest campaign Morrison's ever landed. The client specifically requested me after seeing my portfolio. She paused, letting the words sink in. They said my vision was exactly what modern marketing needed. I pushed the sweet potatoes around my plate, remembering my own recent success, a complete rebrand for a tech startup that had just gone public. But that news had gotten buried under Diana's promotion announcement, just like my art school acceptance had been overshadowed by her college graduation. Just like my first solo gallery show had been forgotten the day she'd gotten engaged to David before Tyler, before Marcus, before Connor. And how's your little design hobby going, Sarah? My mother asked, the word hobby loaded with more condescension than a 3-syllable word should be able to carry. It's a business, Mom. I have my own studio downtown. I'd said these exact words at least 50 times over the past decade. They never seemed to stick. Oh, right. Of course. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. I keep forgetting. It's just so different from a real corporate position. Diana leaned forward, her engagement ring catching the light. Actually, I have an announcement. The table went silent. Even Dad stopped mid-carve. Tyler proposed. The dining room erupted in congratulations and champagne toasts. Margaret actually squealed, a sound I hadn't heard since Diana's high school graduation. Robert clasped Tyler's hand in a firm handshake when he arrived 20 minutes later, apologizing for his lateness with a story about a client emergency that sounded rehearsed. Through it all, I sat in my chair, watching my family orbit around Diana's happiness while I remained invisible. The pumpkin cheesecake stayed in the kitchen, forgotten like my presence at this table. Oh, Sarah, Diana turned to me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I've been thinking. For the wedding stationery, you could design everything. The save the dates, invitations, programs. It would be your gift to us. The room fell quiet. Even Tyler looked uncomfortable. Diana, that's quite a lot of work, Robert said quietly, but Margaret immediately overruled him. Don't be silly, Robert. Sarah has plenty of time. It's not like she has board meetings to attend or quarterly reports to file. She smiled at me expectantly. You'd love to do this for your sister, wouldn't you? It would be such good exposure for your business. Internal monologue, the drive home. I replayed that dinner conversation during the 40-minute drive back to my apartment. Each word felt like a small cut. Hobby. Plenty of time. Good exposure. As if 10 years of building my client base, winning design awards, and maintaining a studio in one of the city's most competitive markets was just an extended arts and crafts session. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. So excited about the wedding designs. Pinterest board coming your way. Think elegant, timeless, sophisticated. The Ashworth family has standards. The Ashworth family. Tyler's old money Boston lineage that traced back to the Mayflower. Another detail for Diana to polish her image with. I pulled into my parking space behind the converted warehouse that housed my studio. The building was split between creative businesses, a photographer on the second floor, a jewelry designer in the basement, and my graphic design studio taking up the entire third floor. It wasn't a corporate office in a glass tower downtown, but it was mine. My phone rang as I climbed the stairs. Chris, my closest friend and the curator at the Meridian Gallery. Let me guess, he said without preamble. Family dinner didn't go well. Diana's engaged. Guess who gets to design the wedding suite for free? Please tell me you told them to shove their good exposure somewhere creative. I fumbled with my keys. I said yes. Silence. Then, Sarah, what the hell? Flashback of building the plan. Studio nights. The first thing I learned about wedding design was that it brings out the worst in people. Over the next 3 weeks, Diana sent me 17 different Pinterest boards, changed the color scheme 5 times, and requested fonts that conveyed more sophistication than Arial Black apparently possessed. The borders need more flourish, she texted at 2 a.m. Tyler's mother mentioned that their family crest has intricate detailing. Can you incorporate elements that speak to generational elegance? I stared at my computer screen, the cursor blinking in the empty design document. Outside my studio windows, the city slept peacefully, unaware that I was crafting something that would detonate Diana's carefully constructed world. The QR code idea came to me during one of Tyler's surprise visits to the architectural firm next door. I was working late, the studio dark except for my monitor's glow, when I heard his voice in the hallway. I miss you too, V, he was saying. Tomorrow night? Diana has that wedding planning session with the caterer. She'll be busy all evening. V, Victoria Hart, Diana's maid of honor and best friend since college. The same Victoria who'd been traveling for work every time there was a group gathering. The same Victoria whose Instagram had gone mysteriously private 3 months ago, right around the time Diana and Tyler got engaged. I grabbed my phone and started recording, then felt sick about it. But the conversation continued. Hotel names, time slots, elaborate lies about business meetings and family obligations. By the time Tyler's footsteps faded down the hallway, I had 20 minutes of audio that painted a very clear picture. Chris found me the next morning surrounded by crumpled coffee cups and design printouts. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. I showed him the QR code I'd embedded in the invitation border. To the casual observer, it looked like an ornate pattern of delicate swirls and flourishes that spoke to the generational elegance Diana had requested. But scan it with any smartphone, and it led to a private photo album. Sarah, this is insane. You're talking about nuclear-level family destruction. I pulled up the album on my laptop. Screenshots of text messages between Tyler and Victoria. Hotel receipts. Photos from their weekend getaway to the Hamptons while Diana thought Victoria was at a fashion conference. She's planning to marry him, Chris. She's planning to build a life with someone who's been lying to her for months. And Victoria? Victoria is supposed to be her maid of honor. But this isn't just telling Diana the truth. This is telling everyone. I saved the design file and looked at him. Maybe everyone needs to know. Flashback, the production process. The print shop on Newbury Street specialized in high-end wedding stationery. I'd worked with them before on client projects. They had the best letterpressing equipment in the city and could handle the gold foil detailing Diana had insisted upon. Beautiful work, the printer said, examining the proofs. The border pattern is particularly intricate. Very elegant. If he only knew what those elegant swirls concealed. I ordered 300 save the dates, each one individually pressed with gold foil, each one carrying its hidden payload. Diana had provided the guest list of Boston society's finest, plus family and close friends. Old money, new money, and the kind of people who made their living managing other people's money. When do you need them? Next week. The engagement party is Saturday. The printer nodded. Rush job, but we can do it. Premium rush pricing, of course. I paid with my personal credit card. Diana's wedding gift was about to cost me $3,000. But watching her world crumble would be priceless. Flashback the discovery. Audio evidence. I thought I was clever, setting up the QR code, gathering photographic evidence. But the universe handed me something better. A live recording session. Tyler came by the studio the following week, ostensibly to check on invitation progress. But his phone call in the hallway gave me everything I needed. Babe, I can't keep doing this, he was saying, his voice carrying through the thin walls. Diana's getting suspicious. Yesterday she asked why I'm always working late on the same days you have client dinners. Victoria's voice was a tinny whisper through the phone speaker. She doesn't know anything. Diana's too busy with wedding planning to notice what's right in front of her. But the wedding's in 2 months. After that, we'll figure it out. Maybe she'll be too busy being the perfect wife to notice you're never home. They laughed. Actually laughed about deceiving my sister. I crept closer to the door, phone recording everything. I love you, V. I know I should call off the wedding, but you know how my family feels about Diana. They think she's perfect for the image they want to maintain. And I think you're perfect exactly as you are. Even if you're cheating on your fiancé with her best friend. More laughter. I had enough audio evidence to destroy 3 lives. The question was, should I? Present day, the confrontation continues. You recorded private conversations, Diana accused, her voice hoarse from crying. You violated privacy laws. I recorded conversations in a public hallway where Tyler chose to conduct his affairs planning. She grabbed the printed invitations from my desk, studying the QR codes she'd approved just days earlier. How long have you known? About Tyler and Victoria. 3 weeks. About Tyler being a coward who'd rather cheat than break an engagement his parents arranged for social climbing purposes? That became clear pretty quickly. Diana sank into my client chair, her perfect posture finally crumbling. For the first time in years, she looked human. Vulnerable. Like the sister who used to share her Halloween candy with me when we were kids. Why didn't you just tell me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. When has this family ever believed me over you? When you said I broke mom's vase, who got punished? When you claimed I cheated off your homework, who got grounded? When you told everyone I made up stories about David hitting on me at your graduation party, that was different. Was it? Or was it just easier to make me the liar than admit you'd chosen another winner? My phone buzzed against the desk. Chris, probably watching the news coverage. The scandal had made local television. Designer sister exposes wedding fraud through hidden QR codes. My 15 minutes of fame, courtesy of Diana's poor judgment in men. Flashback the printing day. The save the dates came out perfectly. Each gold foil accent caught the light like a promise of elegance. Each carefully embedded QR code lay hidden in the decorative borders like a spider waiting in its web. Diana picked up the first batch personally, arriving at my studio with her usual dramatic flair. Let me see them, she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. I handed her the box of finished pieces. She lifted each invitation to the light, examining the gold foil work with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. The quality is acceptable, she said finally. Though I still think the font could have been more sophisticated. I'm glad it meets your standards. Tyler's parents are particular about presentation. They've been planning society weddings for 3 generations. She carefully placed the invitations back in their box. These go out tomorrow morning. No mistakes, Sarah. The Ashworth reputation depends on perfection. I watched her leave, carrying 300 pieces of perfectly crafted explosive devices. Tomorrow morning, the countdown would begin. Flashback of the deployment, I mailed the save the dates myself, driving to 3 different post offices to ensure even distribution. Each envelope felt heavy with significance. Each stamp seemed to pulse with anticipation. The engagement party was tomorrow night. By this time next week, Diana's carefully curated life would be in ruins. Chris met me for dinner that evening, choosing a restaurant far from Diana's usual haunts. Last chance to reconsider, he said, not touching his food. I've been considering for 29 years. I took a sip of wine. I considered when she convinced our parents that art school was a waste of money while they paid for her MBA. I considered when she accidentally scheduled her engagement party the same weekend as my gallery opening. I considered when she introduced me to her friends as my sister who does cute little drawings. This is different, Sarah. This is permanent. I looked around the restaurant, couples sharing intimate dinners, families celebrating small moments, friends laughing over shared stories. Normal people living authentic lives. So is living a lie. Present day, the fallout, Diana's phone buzzed incessantly on my desk. Text messages, missed calls, voicemail notifications piling up faster than she could read them. The Ashworths are furious, she said, scrolling through the chaos. Tyler's father is threatening legal action. Against whom? Truth isn't legally actionable. Against you. For invasion of privacy, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I pulled up the metadata on my computer. Everything I documented happened in public spaces or was voluntarily shared on social media. Tyler and Victoria chose their locations. They chose their indiscretions. I just provided the frame. The studio door burst open. Tyler stormed in, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his face flushed with anger and panic. What the hell is wrong with you? He shouted. Do you have any idea what you've done? Diana looked up from her phone. Tyler, I thought you were at your parents' house doing damage control. He stopped short, seeming to notice her for the first time. Diana, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've been sleeping with my best friend for 4 months? Can you explain why you proposed to me when you were planning a romantic getaway with Victoria? Can you explain why you thought I was too stupid to figure it out eventually? It wasn't supposed to happen this way, he said lamely. What way was it supposed to happen? Were you going to tell me on our wedding night? On our first anniversary? When we had kids? I watched this confrontation from behind my computer screen, feeling oddly detached from the destruction I'd caused. This wasn't my conversation anymore. It was between a cheating fiance and the woman whose trust he'd betrayed. I loved you, Diana said quietly. I actually loved you. I know. I know you did. And I tried. God, Dana, I tried to love you back. But you loved her more. Tyler couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry. No. Diana stood up, her composure returning like armor sliding back into place. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. Flashback, the parents' response. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. the day after the scandal broke. Mom first, then Dad, then a parade of relatives who'd managed to get their hands on the save the dates and scan the QR codes themselves. I let them all go to voicemail. Margaret's message was predictably dramatic. Sarah Elizabeth, what have you done? Diana is hysterical. The Ashworths are beside themselves. Your father's clients are calling asking about the family scandal. Fix this immediately. Dad's message was quieter, but somehow more devastating. Sweetheart, I know you had your reasons, but this is a lot of collateral damage. Please call us. We need to talk. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to my studio and worked on client projects, logos for small businesses, branding for startups, authentic work for people who valued honesty. Chris brought coffee and newspapers around noon. The scandal had made the metro section. Wedding scandal rocks Boston society. Designer's sister exposes affair through QR code. You're famous, he said, not sounding particularly happy about it. Infamous, more like. Same thing in our industry. He sat down across from my desk. I've had 3 calls this morning. People want to hire the designer who embedded secrets in wedding invitations. I looked up from my computer. Seriously? Sarah, you've accidentally revolutionized wedding stationery. Truth in design is going to be the next big trend. Mark my words. Present day, unexpected visitors. A knock on the studio door interrupted Tyler's stammering apologies. My father stood in the doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Dad, he took in the scene, Diana crying in my client chair, Tyler pacing near the windows, me sitting calmly at my computer like the eye of a hurricane. Tyler, he said quietly, I think you should leave. Mr. Chen, I can explain. I don't think there's anything left to explain, son. Diana, would you like me to drive you home? She shook her head. I need to talk to Sarah first. Tyler started to protest, but Dad's courtroom voice cut through his objections. Now would be a good time for you to call your attorney. From what I've seen online, you're going to need one. After Tyler left, Dad pulled up another chair. Well, he said finally, this is a hell of a mess. I suppose it is. Your mother's in hysterics. She thinks the neighbors are judging us. Are they? Dad laughed, a sound I rarely heard. Probably. Though half of them are asking if you're available to design their next party invitations. Diana looked up from her phone. This isn't funny, Dad. No, honey, it's not. Your heart's been broken, your trust has been violated, and your wedding's been canceled. But that's not Sarah's fault. She could have told me privately. Would you have believed her? Dad's question hung in the air. If Sarah had come to you with photos and recordings and told you Tyler was cheating, what would you have done? Diana was quiet for a long moment. I would have thought she was jealous. Exactly. So she made sure you couldn't ignore the truth. By humiliating me in front of everyone I know? By preventing you from marrying someone who doesn't deserve you. Dad reached over and took Diana's hand. Sweetheart, I know this hurts. But imagine if you'd found out after the wedding. After you'd built a life with him. After kids. Flashback the realization. Victoria's confession. The day before the save the dates were scheduled to arrive, Victoria called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Sarah, we need to talk. Do we? About Tyler. About Diana. About everything. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral territory far from both our usual neighborhoods. Victoria looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I know you know, she said without preamble. Know what? About Tyler and me. You've been watching us. At the firm, at the hotel. I saw you that day you were meeting a client at the Fairmont. I hadn't been meeting a client. I'd been following them. How long? I asked. 4 months. It started at Diana's birthday party. Tyler was drunk. I was lonely. It was supposed to be a one-time thing. But it wasn't. Victoria shook her head. We kept telling ourselves we'd end it. After the engagement party. After Diana booked the venue. After the save the dates went out. There was always another milestone to get past first. And now? Now the save the dates are about to be mailed. And I can't bear watching Diana plan a wedding to a man who calls my name when he sleeps with her. I stared at her. He what? Last week. Diana told me Tyler said my name during. You know. She laughed about it. Said he must have been thinking about work stress with the Watson account I'm handling. My stomach turned. Diana was creating excuses for her Phoenix betrayal, rationalizing away evidence of his infidelity. Are you going to tell her? Victoria asked. I think she needs to know. She'll hate us both. She should hate you both. You're betraying her every day you let this continue. Victoria started crying then. Ugly tears that ruined her makeup. I love him. I know that's awful to say, but I do. And he loves me. But he won't leave Diana because his parents adore her. So you'll what? Be his mistress forever? Smile at Diana during the wedding ceremony? Hold her babies while you're sleeping with their father? I don't know. The outburst drew stares from other customers. Victoria lowered her voice. I don't know what to do. I stood up to leave. I do. Present day, the media circus. By afternoon, News fans had tripled outside my building. Social media had transformed the scandal into a viral phenomenon. Kirkoder Revenge was trending nationally. Design blogs were calling it revolutionary fusion of analog and digital revelation. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, podcast hosts, design magazines, even a producer from a reality TV show about family drama. I ignored them all and kept working. Chris arrived around 3 p.m. with sandwiches and updates. The story's gone international. BBC just picked it up. Apparently, this is how America does family dysfunction. Great. I'm representing the country now. Also, I have news. The Meridian Gallery wants to do a show. Truth in Design, Hidden Messages in Plain Sight. They're offering you a solo exhibition. I looked up from my monitor. Based on humiliating my sister, based on innovative integration of technology and traditional design. The QR code thing is just the hook. Diana spoke from the client chair where she'd been sitting for hours. Do it. Diana, no, seriously. Do the show. If my misery is going to be famous, at least let it showcase actual talent. She stood up, gathering her purse. I need to go deal with the rest of my life. Cancel vendors, return gifts, figure out how to face my friends again. Diana, wait. She paused at the door. I owe you an apology. Not for exposing Tyler, you did me a favor there, but for the years of treating your career like a hobby, for making you feel invisible, for taking you for granted. I could have handled this differently. Could you have? Really? She gave me a sad smile. You spent years trying to make me see you. Maybe this was the only way to make everyone see the truth. Flashback growing up invisible, Diana and I were born 3 years apart, which might as well have been a generation gap in our family. She walked early, talked early, excelled at everything she touched. I was the quiet one, the one who drew pictures while she gave presentations, who preferred books while she organized social events. Our parents didn't mean to play favorites. Margaret just connected more easily with Diana's outgoing personality and ambitious drive. Robert appreciated Diana's analytical mind and corporate aspirations. She was following in his successful footsteps. I was different, creative, sensitive. My elementary school art teacher called me gifted, but that got lost somewhere between Diana's student council presidency and her debate team championships. By high school, I learned to be content with being the sister who did our stuff. Diana was the one with real potential. I was just Sarah. Art school changed me. For 4 years, I lived in a world where creativity was valued, where different ways of seeing were celebrated. I found my voice through design, learning to communicate truths that words couldn't capture. But coming home for holidays meant shrinking back into the role of Diana's less successful sister. The one with the cute hobby. The one who was still single. The one who couldn't quite figure out how to make art pay the bills like a real job should. Present day, unexpected support. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Tyler's mother, Elizabeth Ashworth. She appeared in my studio doorway like a storm cloud in Chanel. Ms. Chen. Mrs. Ashworth. She glanced around my studio, the design awards on the walls, the sophisticated equipment, the evidence of a serious professional operation. I came to apologize. I'm not sure that's necessary. Oh, it absolutely is. She sat down without invitation. I knew. The words hung between us like a confession. You knew about Tyler and Victoria? I suspected. When someone calls their mistress's name during family dinners, it becomes rather obvious. Elizabeth's voice was crisp, matter of fact. But Tyler was marrying Diana. Beautiful, accomplished Diana from a respectable family. The kind of wife who would look perfect at charity galas and cocktail parties. So you said nothing. I said nothing. And that makes me complicit in this disaster. She gestured toward my computer, where news articles about the scandal were still loading. You did what I should have done months ago. You told the truth. Why didn't you? Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Because Diana loved my son. And I wanted to believe he would grow into loving her back. People do change, after marriages, after children. I thought perhaps, but he didn't. No, he didn't. She stood, smoothing her skirt. The Ashworth family will not be pursuing legal action against you. In fact, I'm rather impressed by your resourcefulness. Before leaving, she paused at the door. That QR code was genius, you know. Elegant, subtle, devastating. If you ever need a reference for clients, you may use my name. Flashback the gallery opening. 6 months later, the Meridian Gallery's Truth in Design exhibition opened on a rainy Thursday evening in May. The main piece was a massive print of Diana's wedding invitation, the QR code magnified to show its intricate integration with the decorative elements. But the exhibition was more than just a scandal. Chris had curated a collection of my work spanning 10 years, logos that told stories, websites that revealed company values, packaging that honestly represented products inside. It's about authenticity in design, I explained to a reporter, making invisible truths visible through visual language. My parents arrived early, looking nervous but determined. Margaret studied each piece carefully, reading every description placard. I never realized, she said finally. All these years, you were trying to tell us something, and we weren't listening. Dad squeezed my shoulder. We're listening now. Diana appeared just before closing time, slipping in quietly while the crowd was thinning. She'd moved to Chicago 2 months earlier, taking a position with a smaller firm, but one that valued innovation over traditional prestige. She stood in front of the wedding invitation display for a long time. Strange seeing it like this, she said when I joined her. Regrets? About Tyler? God, no. About us? She turned to look at me. I wasted so many years treating you like competition instead of family. We both made mistakes. I made more. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked genuine. Victoria sent me a message last week. She's in therapy. Tyler's already with someone new, his secretary, because he's unimaginatively predictable. And you? I'm learning to be alone without being lonely. Turns out I'd never really tried that before. We walked through the gallery together, pausing at each piece. At a collection of logos I designed for small businesses, Diana stopped. This one, she pointed to a design for a family bakery. Tell me what it means. I explained how the typography reflected the family's immigrant journey, how the colors represented tradition passed through generations, how the circular logo suggested continuity and warmth. Diana listened intently. I want to understand. Really understand. Not just pretend to be supportive while secretly thinking it's just pretty pictures. Present day, 1 year later, the anniversary of what would have been Diana's wedding day passed quietly. I spent it working on a new project designs for a nonprofit that helped women leaving abusive relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was designing hope for women escaping lies while my own family continued healing from the truth I'd exposed. Diana called that evening from Chicago. Happy and wedding day, she said. That's morbid, but accurate. I want to thank you again, Sarah, for saving me from a life built on lies. You've thanked me enough. Have I? Because I calculated it. If I'd married Tyler, if I'd found out about Victoria after 5 years of marriage, after children, I did the math. You saved me a minimum of $100,000 in divorce attorney fees alone. I laughed despite myself, always thinking about the bottom line. Some things don't change, but some things do. I met someone. Diana, not like that. I mean, maybe eventually like that. But right now, I just mean I met someone honest. Someone who doesn't need me to be perfect to feel worthy of love. After we hung up, I walked to my studio window and looked out at the city. The lights twinkled like secrets waiting to be revealed, like QR codes embedded in the darkness of night. My phone buzzed with a message from Chris. New client wants to meet tomorrow. Something about truth-telling design for their company rebrand. You've created a whole new market niche. I smiled and typed back. Send them the portfolio with the wedding invitation as the centerpiece. Some truths are worth telling, no matter the cost. Some designs are worth the precision they require. And some families are worth saving from their own carefully constructed lies. I went back to my drafting table, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began sketching. There were more truths to tell, More lies to elegantly expose, more beauty to create from the complicated mess of human authenticity. After all, that's what good design is about, revealing what's already there, just hidden beneath the surface. Epilogue of the letter. 2 years later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with the usual bills and design supply catalogs. The return address was unfamiliar, a law firm in Chicago I'd never heard of. My first instinct was panic. Despite Elizabeth Ashworth's assurance, I'd always worried that Tyler's family might pursue legal action once the media attention died down. But inside was something completely unexpected. A handwritten note from Victoria. Dear Sarah, it began in careful script. I know I'm probably the last person you expected to hear from. I also know you have every right to throw this away without reading it. But I need to say some things, and I'm finally healthy enough to say them properly. I poured coffee and settled at my kitchen table, morning sunlight streaming through the windows of my new apartment. The QR code scandal had brought enough business that I'd been able to move out of the studio building and into a proper home with space to separate work and life. First, I'm sorry. Not the shallow, self-serving kind of sorry Tyler offered when everything fell apart. I'm sorry for betraying Diana, who had been nothing but kind to me since college. I'm sorry for participating in lies that could have destroyed her future. And I'm sorry for putting you in a position where you felt the only option was to expose us publicly. I've been in therapy for 18 months now. My therapist says I need to take responsibility for my choices without expecting forgiveness. So that's what I'm trying to do. The affair wasn't something that just happened. It was a series of decisions I made, knowing they were wrong because I was too cowardly to face the truth about myself. You want to know something ironic? I always envied Diana. Not just for Tyler's attention, but for having a sister. Someone who would always be in her corner, even when she was being impossible. I'm an only child. I never understood what that kind of loyalty looked like until I watched you destroy your relationship with your family to save Diana from a terrible mistake. That's real love, Sarah. Painful, complicated, but real. I'm writing this because Diana and I had coffee last month. Yes, we're speaking again. It took 2 years, but we're slowly rebuilding something honest. She told me about your parents coming to the gallery show, about your father finally seeing your work properly. She said your mother even bought one of your pieces, the one about finding voice in silence. Diana also told me you've never responded to Tyler's attempts to contact you. Good. He still doesn't understand what he did wrong. He married his secretary 6 months after your revelation, and according to mutual friends, he's already cheating on her too. Some people never learn. But here's why I'm really writing. Diana showed me the designs you did for her company's rebrand. The way you captured their values in visual form: honesty, innovation, resilience. You didn't just design a logo. You designed a promise about who they are. I have a confession. I kept one of the save the dates. Not because I wanted to remember the affair, but because I wanted to remember the moments someone had the courage to tell the truth when everyone else was living a lie. It's framed in my office, next to my therapy degree. Yes, I'm a therapist now, specializing in relationship honesty and communication. The irony isn't lost on me either. But perhaps people who've lived through deception are best equipped to help others recognize it. I have clients now who are where Diana was engaged to people who are lying to them, building futures on foundations of dishonesty. When I tell them about the QR code scandal without names, of course, they listen. Sometimes they investigate. Sometimes they leave. Sometimes they save themselves years of pain. Your design didn't just expose one lie, Sarah. It's been exposing lies ever since. That wedding invitation is teaching people to look more carefully, to trust their instincts, to value truth over comfort. Diana said you're working on a book, Truth in Visual Language: How Design Reveals What Words Hide. I want you to know that pre-orders are already strong among therapists. We understand the power of showing people what they can't yet see in themselves. I don't expect a response to this letter. I just wanted you to know that the ripples from that QR code are still spreading, still helping people choose truth over beautiful lies. With gratitude and respect, Victoria, P.S. Diana's engaged again. To someone who actually deserves her this time. Someone who knew about the QR code scandal before their first date and said it made him admire her strength in rebuilding afterward. She's planning to ask you to design the invitations. She hopes you'll say yes this time for joy instead of revenge. Final scene: the studio. Present day. I folded the letter carefully and walked to my studio, which now occupied the entire top floor of a converted textile factory. The space was flooded with natural light, walls covered with my latest work, campaigns for ethical companies, logos for nonprofits, designs that helped organizations tell their authentic stories. The infamous wedding invitation hung in a place of honor, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Next to it, a new piece was taking shape on my drafting table: preliminary sketches for Diana's real wedding invitations. This time, there would be no hidden codes, no secrets embedded in decorative borders, just elegant typography announcing a celebration of genuine love, honest communication, and second chances. My phone buzzed with a text from Chris. Museum of Design wants to acquire the QR code piece for their permanent collection. They're calling it a pivotal moment in truth-telling design. I typed back, only if the proceeds go to Diana's nonprofit. She'd started an organization helping women leave deceptive relationships, partly inspired by her own experience. Another message appeared, this one from Diana herself. Mom wants to know if you're bringing anyone to the wedding. I told her you'd bring yourself, and that would be enough. But in case you're interested, Tyler's therapist has a cute brother who's also in therapy and knows the whole story. Apparently, baggage doesn't scare him. I laughed out loud. Diana had developed a sense of humor about the whole situation, probably the healthiest way to move forward. Tell Mom I'll bring my camera. Someone should document what an honest wedding looks like. Sarah, came her quick reply. Thank you. For everything. Even the QR code. Especially the QR code. I set my phone aside and returned to the wedding invitation sketches. This time, the only thing hidden in the design would be the love and skill I put into crafting something beautiful and true. Outside my studio windows, the city hummed with life, millions of people navigating relationships, making choices between comfort and honesty, between pretty lies and difficult truths. Somewhere among them, someone was probably scanning a QR code from a wedding invitation, discovering a secret that would change their life. I smiled and picked up my pencil. Truth, it turned out, was the most beautiful design element of all. And you tried to sell it back to me. My words hung in the air of Borrington's calf, each syllable a quiet thunderclap against the backdrop of clinking silverware and hushed conversations. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across our corner table, illuminating dust particles that danced between us like unsettled ghosts. Diana, I couldn't bring myself to call her mother in that moment, sat perfectly postured in her cream cashmere sweater, not a silver hair out of place. Her face, usually a masterpiece of composure, fractured slightly at the edges. A muscle twitched near her eye. The pearls at her neck seemed to constrict. Ellen, you're being ridiculous, she hissed, voice low but sharp enough to cut. This isn't about betrayal. It's about practicality. You've always been too emotional to see the bigger picture. Across from her, Catherine Reynolds, my attorney, laid out the documents one by one, the forged signature on the sale agreement, the plane tickets proving I was across the country when I supposedly signed, the authentication certificates for the art pieces they'd tried to replace with reproductions. Each paper landed with the weight of truth. Mrs. Caldwell, Catherine said, her professional calm a perfect counterpoint to my mother's fraying composure. Forging your daughter's signature is a felony. The evidence is irrefutable. James Wilson, the property developer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My cousin Pamela, tucked into the corner seat, stopped scrolling through her phone. Even my father Robert, perpetually passive, couldn't meet my eyes. I studied them all, these people who shared my blood but not my values. For 45 years, I'd been the quiet one, the librarian who spoke softly and stepped aside. The one they thought they could simply write out of the story. But Grandpa Henry had known better. A silent river still carves mountains, he used to tell me, his weathered hand patting mine. Never mistake stillness for weakness. As I watched my mother's carefully constructed fod crumble, I felt no triumph, only a deep, complicated ache. This wasn't how family was supposed to end. Catherine slid one final document across the table, Henry's original will, with its explicit clause about the house. My inheritance. My legacy. We're done here, she said, gathering her papers as my mother stared at the evidence of her betrayal. In that moment, caught between victory and heartbreak, I understood what Grandpa meant about being the keeper of meaning. Some things, memory, truth, integrity, were worth fighting for, even when the battle left scars on both sides. Outside, Boston's autumn painted the trees in fiery declarations of change. Nothing would ever be the same again. And perhaps that was exactly as it should be. 2 weeks earlier, the brass nameplate gleamed in the afternoon sun, mocking me with its unfamiliar lettering, P. Mitchell. I stood frozen on the brick pathway, my breath creating small clouds in the crisp autumn air. This couldn't be right. The plaque should have read Mitchell, my grandfather's name, not my cousin's. I clutched my shoulder bag tighter, a knot forming in my throat. 2 weeks since we buried Grandpa Henry, and already they were erasing him. Erasing me. My key still worked in the lock, small mercies, though the familiar creak of the door now sounded like a warning. The interior of the colonial home that had been my sanctuary since childhood felt wrong, too sterile, too perfect. Gone was the comforting clutter of Grandpa's books, the slight disarray that spoke of a life well lived. In its place, a museum-like precision that made my skin crawl. Ellen, you're early. My mother's voice, carrying from the hallway, was pitched in that artificial brightness she reserved for uncomfortable situations. Diana Caldwell appeared a moment later, elegant as always in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, silver hair swept into a perfect French twist. At 68, she still moved with the authority of the high school English teacher she'd been for 30 years, someone accustomed to controlling her environment. Early for what? I asked, though something in my stomach already knew. Pamela's been helping organize things, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the living room where neatly labeled boxes were stacked against the wall. We're preparing for the transition. I stepped further into the house. My childhood home during summer breaks, the place where I'd spent every holiday and long weekend during my adult life. The place Grandpa promised would be mine. Transition to what? Mother's smile tightened. The sale? Darling. The house goes on the market next week. The room tilted slightly. Sale? But Grandpa said, your grandfather said a lot of things, Ellen. She sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment I'd heard throughout my life. But wishes aren't legally binding. The property is in the family trust, and your father and I are the executors. I moved past her, needing to escape her perfectly reasonable tone, and found myself in Grandpa's study. The room was darker than I remembered, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the afternoon light. His massive oak desk still dominated the space, but the surfaces had been cleared of his organized chaos, the stacks of research notes, the magnifying glass he used for examining manuscripts, the half-finished mugs of tea. Instead, everything was categorized into bankers' boxes, Henry's papers, family documents, books for appraisal. I ran my fingers along the edge of his desk, remembering how he'd sit here in the evenings, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, sharing passages from whatever historical text had captured his imagination that day. This house has good bones, he'd often say, and so do you, Ellie girl. Remember that when the storms come. I hadn't understood what he meant until now. Standing in his emptied study, I felt my spine straighten slightly. Something wasn't right. Grandpa had been meticulous about his affairs, especially about the house. He wouldn't have left this to chance. A soft noise from the doorway made me turn. My father Robert stood there, looking older than his 70 years, hands tucked into the pockets of his cardigan. Ellen, he said quietly, we were hoping you'd be reasonable about this. I studied him, the stooped shoulders, the careful avoidance of direct eye contact. My father had spent a lifetime taking the path of least resistance, bending to my mother's stronger will rather than risking conflict. Dad, Grandpa told me specifically that he was leaving me this house. He showed me the will. He shifted uncomfortably. Things change, sweetheart. The house is too much for you to manage on a librarian's salary. The property taxes alone. I can manage just fine, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I want to see the will. His eyes darted toward the doorway, checking for my mother. Your mother has all the paperwork. But Ellen, please don't make this difficult. The buyer is offering well above market value. Buyer? You already have a buyer? The study door opened wider as Pamela sauntered in, phone in hand as always. At 43, my cousin had the polished look of the successful real estate agent she presented herself as: designer clothes, perfect manicure, carefully highlighted hair. She'd been my mother's favorite niece since childhood, the daughter Diana wished she'd had instead of quiet, bookish me. James Wilson, Pamela said, not looking up from her phone. Barrington Development. They're planning to renovate and flip. It's a great deal, Ellen. Everyone wins. Except me. Except Grandpa's legacy. I need some air, I murmured, pushing past them both and heading toward the kitchen and the back door beyond. The autumn garden, at least, remained unchanged, Grandpa's prized hydrangeas fading into their fall colors, the old maple tree beginning to turn, the wrought iron bench where we'd spent countless evenings discussing books and history and the meaning of things. I sat heavily on the bench, trying to process what was happening. They couldn't just sell the house, not if Grandpa had left it to me. There had to be something I was missing. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think like the research librarian I was. Facts, not emotions. Evidence, not assumptions. What would Grandpa have done if he'd suspected something like this might happen? Left a trail, of course. He was a historian, after all. And he taught me that history leaves marks, if you know where to look. The discovery. Ellen Caldwell? Walter Freeman's voice cracked slightly at the edges, his thin frame silhouetted against the morning light streaming through his kitchen window. At 78, Grandpa's oldest friend looked frailer than I remembered, but his eyes remained sharp, assessing me from behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Freeman. I stood awkwardly on his front porch, the envelope Grandpa had left me clutched in my hand. I'm sorry to bother you, but Henry said you'd come. He stepped aside, gesturing me in with a gnarled hand. Took you long enough. The small bungalow smelled of coffee and old books, a comforting combination that immediately reminded me of Grandpa. I followed Walter through the narrow hallway into a sunny kitchen where 2 mugs already waited on the table. You knew I was coming today? I asked, settling into a chair as he poured coffee with careful precision. Walter's smile was small but warm. Not today specifically. But Henry knew what they tried to do. Diana never could see past dollar signs, even as a child. I wrapped my hands around the mug, drawing warmth from the ceramic. Then you know about the house? And the art collection and the first editions. He nodded, easing himself into the chair opposite mine. Your mother's been planning this since before Henry took ill. She and Robert need the money, his pension's not covering their lifestyle, and her retirement fund took a hit in the downturn. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet it did. My parents had always projected comfortable security, the picture of upper middle class stability. How do you know all this? Walter reached for a folder tucked beside a stack of newspapers. Because Henry knew. And he prepared. He slid the folder across the table. Inside was a collection of documents: property deeds, insurance valuations for art pieces, verification of provenance for several first edition books, and, most shockingly, printouts of emails between my mother and cousin discussing how to handle Ellen once the property was sold. She said I was too emotional to manage the inheritance, I murmured, reading through the correspondence. That I just wasted on those dusty books you're always restoring. Walter made a sound somewhere between a snort and a sigh. Diana never understood what Henry was building, a legacy of knowledge, not just assets. But you did. I looked up from the papers, a memory surfacing of Grandpa showing me a fragile manuscript he'd acquired, explaining how such objects weren't just valuable for their rarity, but for the human connection they represented across centuries. There's something else, Walter said, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a small digital recorder. Henry left this with me. Said you'd need to hear his voice when the time came. He pressed play, and suddenly Grandpa was there in the room with us, his voice slightly raspy but unmistakable. Ellie, if you're listening to this, then they've done exactly what I feared. The house is yours, legally, morally, every way that matters. The clause in my will is explicit. They can't sell without your signature, witnessed in person by two separate parties. Diana knows this, but she's hoping you won't check. I felt tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. You've always been the quiet one, letting others speak over you. They mistake your silence for weakness, your thoughtfulness for indecision. But I've always seen the steel beneath. You're the keeper of meaning now, Ellie. Some things are worth fighting for. The recording ended, and I sat in stunned silence, processing his words. Keeper of meaning. It was what he'd called himself, a custodian not just of objects, but of their stories, their significance, their place in the human continuum. There's a lawyer you should talk to, Walter said, sliding a business card across the table. Catherine Reynolds. Henry arranged everything with her last year. I took the card, running my thumb over the embossed lettering. Why didn't he tell me any of this while he was alive? Walter's eyes crinkled with something like compassion. Would you have believed how far they'd go? Sometimes we can't hear certain truths until we're ready for them. Later, walking back to my car with the folder of evidence, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet recalibration, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. All my life, I'd been the one who stepped aside, who kept the peace, who absorbed others' disappointments rather than creating waves. Grandpa had seen something different in me. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been right. The research. My apartment felt smaller than usual that evening, the walls of my modest one-bedroom pressing in as I spread the documents across my dining table. 12 years as a research librarian had taught me methodical investigation, and I applied those skills now to the mystery of my own inheritance. First, the will. I read it carefully, highlighting the crucial clause. The Mitchell family home at 47 Hawthorne Lane, with all its contents, is bequeathed to my granddaughter, Ellen Caldwell. Under no circumstances may the property be sold without her explicit written consent, given in person before two witnesses. Clear, unambiguous, legally binding. Next, the sale agreement my mother had shown me, complete with what appeared to be my signature. I compared it to several samples of my actual handwriting, close, remarkably close, but not perfect. The slight curl at the end of the N in Ellen was wrong, too deliberate. I pulled my laptop closer, checking my calendar and email for the date of the supposed signing, May 14th. I'd been in Chicago that entire week, leading a workshop on manuscript preservation at the National Librarians Conference. I had flight confirmations, hotel receipts, even photos of me at the event. Forgery. Actual, criminal forgery. My hands trembled slightly as I organized everything into a folder. This wasn't just about deception anymore. It was fraud. My own mother had committed fraud. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. Who would I even call? My small circle of friends wouldn't understand the magnitude of this, the visceral betrayal beneath the legal technicalities. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing a detailed timeline of events, organizing digital copies of all evidence, creating a case file as meticulously as I would for any research project. The work calmed me, the familiar process of documentation providing structure to the chaos of emotions. As midnight approached, I sat back in my chair, stretching tired shoulders. One question kept circling in my mind. Why? Why this desperate grab for money? Why the elaborate deception? My parents had always appeared comfortable financially. Dad's accounting career and mom's teaching pension should have provided a stable retirement. But appearances could be deceiving. I knew that better than most. I opened a browser and typed in their address, checking property records. Their home had a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago. I searched further, finding public records of a tax lien from 2 years back. More digging revealed a lawsuit against my father's former firm for mismanagement of funds, settled out of court, but the legal fees would have been substantial. They were underwater financially. And Pamela, despite her designer clothes and carefully curated social media presence showcasing luxury listings, had declared bankruptcy after her second divorce last year. They weren't just being greedy. They were desperate. The revelation should have softened my anger, but instead, it crystallized something harder within me. They could have asked for help. They could have been honest. Instead, they'd chosen deception, manipulation, theft. I picked up Walter's business card again and ran my finger over the name. Catherine Reynolds, estate law. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I would fight back. Sleep came fitfully that night, memories washing over me in restless waves. Grandpa teaching me chess in his study. Mom's perpetual disappointment in my career choice. A librarian, Ellen? With your intelligence, you could have been a lawyer or doctor. Pamela and her friends laughing at my sensible clothes during family gatherings. Dad's gentle but ineffectual defenses of my choices. And beneath it all, Grandpa's voice, the keeper of meaning. What exactly had he meant? It wasn't until the gray light of pre-dawn that understanding finally came. It wasn't just about preserving objects, the house, the art, the books. It was about honoring what those things represented: integrity, knowledge, the quiet dignity of things that endure. My family wanted to convert Grandpa's legacy into cash. But some things, once sold, could never be bought back. The strategy. Catherine Reynolds' office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian in Boston's Back Bay, the interior a blend of historical architecture and modern efficiency. The woman herself matched her surroundings: traditional pearl earrings and a tailored charcoal suit juxtaposed with a no-nonsense efficiency I found immediately reassuring. Henry Mitchell was one of my favorite clients, she said, after reviewing the documents I'd brought. Brilliant mind, excellent foresight. He anticipated exactly what's happening now. You knew my grandfather well? I asked, surprised by this connection. For nearly 20 years. I handled all his acquisitions, insurance valuations, property matters. She looked up from the papers, studying me. He spoke of you often, Miss Caldwell. With great pride. Something warm and painful expanded in my chest. Grandpa and I had been close, but he'd never been effusive with praise. To hear he'd spoken proudly of me to others felt like a posthumous gift. Can they really sell the house without my consent? I asked, focusing on the legal matters at hand. Catherine's smile was small but sharp. Not legally, no. The clause in the will is ironclad. And forging your signature? That's criminal fraud. She leaned forward. But you should be prepared. They won't back down easily. People rarely do when caught in deception. What should I expect? Deflection, first. Then counter-accusations. Your mother will likely claim you're emotionally unstable, that Henry was mentally compromised when he wrote the will. She'll paint herself as the reasonable one, acting in everyone's best interests, including yours. The assessment was so accurate it made me flinch. All my life, Mother had framed my quietness, my thoughtfulness, as weakness, evidence that I needed her guidance and control. What about the art? The books? I asked. Catherine nodded, making notes. We'll need to inventory everything immediately. Based on these insurance documents, some pieces have significant historical and monetary value. If they're planning to sell the house, they may have already moved or replaced items. The thought sent a chill through me. How do we proceed? Carefully. Catherine set down her pen. We need to document everything, file emergency injunctions to halt the sale, and prepare for their countermoves. But first, she reached for her phone, punching in a number. James? Catherine Reynolds. We need to talk about the Mitchell property on Hawthorne Lane. A pause. Yes, that's the one. No, I'm afraid there's a significant problem with the sale. I'm representing the legal heir, Ellen Caldwell. After hanging up, she turned back to me. James Wilson is an old colleague. Ethical, generally speaking. He wasn't aware of the irregularities with this transaction. What happens next? We meet. All parties, neutral location. I suggest Barrington's Cafe tomorrow at 2. Public enough to discourage scenes, private enough for frank discussion. She gathered the documents into a folder. In the meantime, don't confront your family directly. Don't tell them what you know. Let them think you're still the passive Ellen they expect. I nodded, drawing a deep breath. I can do that. Catherine's expression softened slightly. Your grandfather told me once that you had the quietest strength of anyone he knew. I believe we're about to prove him right. Outside, I stood for a moment on the brick sidewalk, watching autumn leaves skitter across the pavement. All my life, I'd avoided confrontation, stepping back, staying silent. The thought of facing my family across a table, challenging their deception openly, made my stomach clench with anxiety. But beneath the fear was something else, a slow burning resolve. I thought of Grandpa's study, the careful way he preserved not just objects but their stories, their context, their meaning. I thought of his voice on the recording, the faith he'd placed in me. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight left you scarred. The memories. That night, sleepless in my apartment, I found myself pulling out old photo albums, physical ones, not digital, because Grandpa had insisted some memories deserved the permanence of paper and ink. Each page captured moments I'd almost forgotten. Summers at the lake house, Grandpa teaching me to fish. Holidays around the massive oak dining table, the room warm with laughter and debate. Quiet evenings in his study, learning to repair book bindings under his patient instruction. One photo made me pause, me at about 12, sitting cross-legged on the library floor surrounded by open books, completely absorbed. Mother stood in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of exasperation and something else, perhaps fear? I couldn't recall the specific moment, but the dynamic captured was familiar enough. My passion for books and history had always mystified her, perhaps even threatened her. "You're just like him," she'd say sometimes, and never as a compliment. The realization hit me with surprising force. She'd been jealous of my relationship with Grandpa, of our shared interests, of the comfortable silence we could inhabit together, while she always needed noise and movement and attention. I turned another page, finding a photo from my graduate school graduation. Grandpa stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, face creased with pride. Mother and father flanked us, smiling for the camera but somehow separate, as if posing for a different photograph altogether. There had been an argument that day, I'd forgotten until now. Mother had questioned my decision to specialize in historical preservation instead of rare book valuation. "There's no money in preservation," she'd said over lunch. "If you're going to waste your time with old books, at least learn how to profit from them." Grandpa had intervened, his voice mild but firm. "The value of knowledge isn't always measured in dollars, Diana. Ellen understands that." She'd given him that look, the one that made her high school students quail. But Grandpa had simply continued eating his soup, unmoved. I closed the album, new understandings settling like sediment after a storm. This wasn't just about money, though that was certainly part of it. This was about control, about narrative, about who got to determine what mattered and what didn't. Mother had always tried to shape me into someone more like herself, practical, socially adept, materially focused. And for most of my life, I'd tried to bend to her expectations, quieting my own instincts, doubting my own values. But Grandpa had seen me clearly and valued what he saw. His legacy wasn't just the house or the collections. It was permission to be fully myself, to trust my own understanding of what gave life meaning. Tomorrow, facing my family across that caf table, I wouldn't just be fighting for property. I'd be claiming my own story. The revelation. The study door creaked softly as I eased it open, early morning light filtering through gaps in the velvet curtains. I'd returned to Grandpa's house one last time before the calf confrontation, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that there was more to discover. The room smelled of old books and furniture polish, the familiar scent momentarily transporting me back to countless afternoons spent here, listening to Grandpa's stories about historical figures who changed the world through quiet persistence rather than dramatic gestures. "Revolution isn't always loud, Ellie," he'd say, eyes twinkling behind his reading glasses. "Sometimes it's just one person refusing to accept what isn't right." I moved toward his massive oak desk, running my fingers along the worn edge where generations of Mitchells had sat to write letters, review documents, record family histories. The surface had been cleared of Grandpa's usual organized chaos, but the desk itself remained too heavy, perhaps, for Mother and Pamela to move without help. Kneeling, I examined the ornate panel work along the front of the desk. Grandpa had shown me once, years ago, how the third panel from the left concealed a small compartment, a family secret, he'd whispered conspiratorially. Every Mitchell desk since 1879 has had this feature. I pressed gently at the upper right corner of the panel. Nothing happened. Had they found it already? Discovered whatever Grandpa might have left? Then I remembered. It wasn't the third panel on this desk. This was his second desk. The original had been damaged in a basement flood 15 years ago. This one had the compartment in the fourth panel, not the third. I shifted position, found the right panel, and pressed. A soft click, and a slim drawer slid out, revealing a small leather journal and an envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive slanted script. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope first. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, then you've remembered our lessons well. Trust your memory and your instincts. They rarely lead you astray. The journal contains something Diana desperately wants to hide, the real reason behind her urgent need for money. It's not my place to judge her choices, but neither will I allow her to destroy what we've built together. The truth may hurt, but secrets hurt more in the long run. Remember, Ellie girl, speaking up doesn't mean shouting. Sometimes the quietest voice carries furthest, if its words are true. All my love, Grandpa. I opened the journal with careful fingers, finding it filled with Grandpa's neat handwriting, dates, amounts, names. It was a record of loans made to my mother over the past decade, hundreds of thousands of dollars, none repaid. Notations indicated the purposes: D. Pamela's debt consolidation, D. Robert's legal settlement, D. investment recovery Madoff scheme. The final entry, dated just 3 weeks before his death, contained a single line: Diana requests $200,000 for final expenses. Denied. Suggested alternative solutions. Conversation unproductive. I sat back on my heels, pieces falling into place. My parents hadn't just been struggling financially, they'd been systematically draining Grandpa's resources for years. When he finally refused, they'd planned to sell his home and collections as soon as he was gone. Everything, the forgery, the rushed sale, the dismissal of my inheritance, was born of financial desperation and entitlement. The journal also explained Mother's urgency. The documentation of these loans could potentially impact her share of any remaining inheritance, especially if Grandpa had formally recorded them as loans rather than gifts. I slipped the journal and letter into my bag, replaced the panel, and stood. Sunlight now streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like suspended thoughts. In a few hours, I would face my family with this new knowledge, not to shame them, but to finally bring truth into the light. As I left the study, I paused at the threshold, looking back at the room that had been the heart of Grandpa's world and in many ways, mine. Whatever happened next, this moment of clarity was its own kind of inheritance. The confrontation. Barrington's cafe hummed with mid-afternoon activity, the clinking of cups and murmured conversations creating a civilized backdrop for what promised to be anything but a civilized discussion. I arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered some privacy while remaining visible to other patrons. Catherine joined me shortly after, her professional calm a steadying presence. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, arranging her documents with practiced efficiency. I thought of the journal in my bag, the years of deception it documented. Yes, I think I finally am. James Wilson arrived next, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, followed minutes later by my parents and Pamela. Mother's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Catherine, though she recovered quickly, social training taking over as she extended her hand in greeting. "Diana Caldwell. I don't believe we've met. Catherine Reynolds, representing Ellen in this matter." Catherine's tone was polite but cool. "Thank you all for coming." We settled around the table, an awkward family reunion with legal implications. Father looked pained, shoulders hunched inside his cardigan. Pamela kept her eyes on her phone, thumbs scrolling in practiced indifference. Mother sat perfectly straight, a queen preparing to be reasonable with difficult subjects. "Ellen," she began, voice modulated to concerned parent pitch, "I wish you discussed your concerns with us directly before involving attorneys. Family matters should stay within the family." I met her gaze, noticing for the first time the slight strain around her eyes, the carefully concealed fatigue. "That's exactly why we're here, Mother. Family matters. Catherine opened her portfolio. Let's be direct. The sale agreement for the Mitchell property contains a forged signature purporting to be Ellen's. We have documentation proving she was in Chicago on the date in question. James Wilson shifted uncomfortably. I was assured all parties had consented to the sale. They haven't, Catherine continued, sliding copies of Grandpa's will across the table. Furthermore, this clause explicitly prohibits sale of the property without Ms. Caldwell's in-person consent before witnesses. Mother's composure cracked slightly. That clause was added when Henry was already ill. It doesn't reflect his true intentions. The will was properly executed and witnessed 6 months before his diagnosis. Catherine counted smoothly. The medical records confirm he was fully competent. Pamela finally looked up from her phone. This is ridiculous. Uncle Henry wanted the house sold. He told me so himself last Christmas. I turned to her, keeping my voice level. Did he? Or did he comment on how lovely it would be when your children visited for holidays in the future, and you interpreted that as you wanted to? Her cheeks flushed. Bullseye. Regardless of conversations, Catherine interjected. The legal documentation is clear. The house belongs to Ellen. The attempted sale is invalid, and the forgery raises serious legal concerns. Father cleared his throat. Surely we can resolve this without making accusations. Ellen, sweetheart, we were only thinking of your best interests. The property taxes alone are manageable within my budget, I finished for him. I've done the calculations, Dad. Mother's eyes narrowed. You've always been impractical about money, Ellen. Just like Henry. All those dusty books and artifacts. But what about actual financial security? I reached into my bag and placed Grandpa's journal on the table, opening it to the last page. Speaking of financial security, I think we should discuss these loans. The color drained from Mother's face. She knew exactly what the journal contained. Over $800,000 over 10 years, I said quietly. For Pamela's debts after her divorces, for Dad's legal settlement, for your investment losses. Loans, not gifts. None repaid. A heavy silence fell over the table. Pamela stared at the journal, then at my mother, betrayal flashing across her features. She hadn't known the full extent of it then. Mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. That's private family business. It has nothing to do with the house. It has everything to do with the house. I counted, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. When Grandpa finally refused to give you more money, you decided to sell his home and collections as soon as he was gone. James Wilson looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Caldwell, if there are competing claims to the property, there are no competing claims, Catherine interrupted smoothly. The will is clear. The house belongs to Ellen Caldwell. Mother's composure cracked further, her carefully maintained facade splitting like thin ice under too much weight. You have no idea what it's been like, she hissed, leaning forward. Robert's pension barely covers our property taxes. The Madoff scheme took half our retirement. We needed that money. Then you should have asked, I said, the words simpler than I'd expected. You should have been honest. Instead, you forged my signature and tried to steal my inheritance. Steal? Mother's voice rose sharply. I gave you life. Everything you are is because of me. And you tried to sell it back to me, I replied quietly. The words hung in the air between us, potent and immutable. Around us, the calf continued its gentle hum of activity, oblivious to our private implosion. Father looked stricken, aged beyond his years. Pamela's carefully maintained indifference had shattered, replaced by the naked calculation of someone reassessing their position. And Mother. For perhaps the first time in my life, I saw her clearly, not as the intimidating force that had shaped my existence, but as a woman terrified of losing her carefully constructed world. Ms. Caldwell, James Wilson said, addressing Mother with newfound formality. I'm withdrawing my offer effective immediately. I cannot be party to a transaction with such irregularities. This isn't over, Mother said, but the threat sounded hollow even to my ears. Catherine gathered her papers. It is, Mrs. Caldwell. The legal position is unambiguous. The house remains Ellen's property. Any attempts to remove or sell items from the estate need to cease immediately. And the loans? Father asked quietly, his first direct question of the meeting. We can discuss repayment terms, I said, meeting his gaze. I'm not unreasonable. Mother stood abruptly, gathering her purse with trembling hands. 45 years, she said, voice tight with emotion. 45 years I've tried to make you practical, to help you understand how the world really works. And you still choose his way, impractical, sentimental, living in the past. I rose to meet her, feeling strangely calm. It's not about choosing sides, Mother. It's about honoring promises. About respecting what matters, even when it can't be measured in dollars. Something flickered across her face, recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of respect. You're more like him than I thought, she said finally. It wasn't quite an insult, nor was it a compliment. Yes, I agreed simply. I am. She turned and walked away, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Pamela followed quickly, already on her phone, no doubt spinning the narrative for her social media followers. Father hesitated, conflict evident in every line of his face. Ellen, he began, then stopped, words failing him as they so often did when caught between his wife's demands and his own conscience. It's okay, Dad, I said, and meant it. We'll figure it out. He nodded once, squeezed my shoulder with an unfamiliar firmness, and followed my mother. Catherine and James exchanged business cards, agreeing to coordinate on the formal withdrawal of the sale contract. As they discussed technicalities, I sat back in my chair, a curious lightness spreading through me despite the confrontation's intensity. For 45 years, I'd been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the one who stepped aside. Today, I'd finally found my voice, not in shouting, but in standing firm for what mattered. Grandpa would have been proud. The inheritance. 1 month later, I stood in Grandpa's study, my study now, surrounded by open boxes and piles of books waiting to be returned to their rightful places on the shelves. Autumn had deepened outside, the maple tree in the garden now a blaze of crimson against a steel blue sky. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a heaviness had been lifted from its bones. I'd spent weekends sorting, cleaning, cataloging, discovering small treasures Grandpa had tucked away in unexpected places. A dried flower pressed between the pages of a first edition Thoreau. A handwritten note from Eleanor Roosevelt thanking him for his historical insights. A photograph of him as a young professor, arm around a laughing young woman who would become my grandmother. I was arranging his collection of antique fountain pens when a knock at the front door interrupted my thoughts. Through the window, I spotted my father's car in the driveway, alone, without Mother's sleek sedan beside it. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hands tucked into the pockets of his cardigan, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. Ellen, he said when I opened the door. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all. I stepped aside to let him in, noticing the way his eyes moved appreciatively over the half-restored entryway. I'm just organizing. He nodded, following me into the kitchen where afternoon sunlight warmed the worn wooden table, the same table where Grandpa and I had shared countless cups of tea and conversations. Coffee? I offered, and he accepted with a grateful nod. As I prepared 2 mugs, the silence between us felt different from our usual awkward pauses, less strained, more contemplative. The house looks good, he said finally, accepting the steaming mug I placed before him. You've been working hard. It feels right, I replied, settling across from him. Like bringing things back to their proper places. He nodded, wrapping gnarled fingers around his mug. Arthritis, I noticed, worse than I'd realized. Your mother won't be joining me for these visits, he said quietly. She needs time. I understand. And strangely, I did. Mother's pride had been wounded, her authority challenged, her narrative disrupted. For someone who had spent a lifetime constructing a perfect facade, such cracks in the foundation were devastating. But I wanted you to know. He hesitated, searching for words that had never come easily to him. I'm proud of you, Ellen. Standing up for yourself, for Henry's wishes. It couldn't have been easy. The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It wasn't, I admitted. But it was necessary. We sipped our coffee in companionable silence for a moment. Then father reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I found this in my desk drawer, he said, sliding it across the table. It belongs here with you. Inside the pouch was a tarnished silver pocket watch, its case engraved with intricate leaf patterns. I recognized it immediately, Grandpa's father's watch, part of the Mitchell family heritage. Mom knows you have this? I asked, turning the precious object in my palm. A slight smile crossed his face, revealing a hint of the younger man who had once defied his own family to marry Diana Mitchell. What your mother doesn't know won't hurt her. Some things should stay where they belong. It was a small rebellion, but for my conflict-averse father, it felt monumental. Thank you, I said simply. He nodded, then glanced around the kitchen, eyes settling on the garden visible through the window. Do you remember how Henry used to grow those massive pumpkins every October? Had some special fertilizer mix he'd never reveal. Banana peels and coffee grounds, I said, smiling at the memory. He swore me to secrecy. Father chuckled, the sound rusty, but genuine. Always had his little mysteries, didn't he? We spent the next hour sharing stories about Grandpa. Some I knew, others new to me, glimpses of the young professor my father had first met when courting my mother, the passionate historian who could lose himself for days in research. As afternoon light lengthened into evening shadows, father finally rose to leave. At the door, he paused, looking back at the house with a complicated expression. He always saw something special in you, he said. Something the rest of us missed. The words warmed me like a physical touch. I'm trying to be worthy of that. You already are. He squeezed my hand once, then walked to his car with slightly straighter shoulders than when he'd arrived. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner, then returned to the study, to the books waiting to be shelved, to the stories waiting to be preserved. Months ago, Grandpa had called me the keeper of meaning. I hadn't fully understood then, but I was beginning to now. It wasn't just about maintaining a collection or preserving a house. It was about honoring the truth behind objects, the human connections they represented, the continuity they provided in a world obsessed with disposability and immediate gratification. I picked up an old leather-bound volume of Emerson's essays, Grandpa's favorite, the pages well-thumbed, margins filled with his neat handwriting. Tucked inside was a bookmark with a quote he'd written out. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Outside, the maple leaves rustled in the evening breeze, whispering secrets across generations. Inside, in this house of memory and meaning, I finally understood my inheritance, not just the physical structure with its good bones, but the quiet strength that had always lived within me, waiting to be claimed. Some legacies couldn't be forged, sold, or stolen. Some truths, once recognized, became their own kind of home.